Chess, nonsense, and analysis. Hi, dear viewer, and here we are once again. Today we're going to be talking about a fantastic player, Grandmaster Salo Flohr. And for me, he's an amazing player, positional player, but actually, um, he also became a very interesting sort of background player because he was analyzing, helping many very strong players in the Soviet Union with analysis, in critical moments. But anyway, Salo Flohr was actually born in Ukraine, but after the First World War, his sister and him lost their parents, and they felt they were in danger, so they actually sort of moved they ran away, so to speak. So they then moved to Czechoslovakia, and when he was there, that's when he then became a very strong player, and he was Czech champion for many years. He was considered as the best player ever from that country. And I just want to read something here, just to show how strong he was. So, during the 1930s, Flohr was considered a potential world championship contender. He drew matches with future world champions and grandmasters Max Euwe and Michael Botvinnik, and he played these matches in 1932 and 1933. And he won the Hastings Strong Tournament outright for 3 years in a row, from 1932 to 1934. And yeah, it is said that he actually was looked at as one of the players who was, or the player who was going to challenge Alexander Alekhine for the World Championship, but he unfortunately could not raise the money from the Czech Republic. And then, of course, in the Second World War, he had a Jewish background. So in the Second World War, he had problems, of course, because of the Nazi invasion of that country. And so he was, like once again, moving around, trying to stay ahead. And then in around the 40s, at that time till 1941, 41, he was helped by his friend Mikhail Podvinnik to settle in the Soviet Union. So there's a very nice, nice for us as readers, I guess, story where he goes to the Soviet Union and he lets them know that he wants to stay over. He wants to move into the Soviet Union, and of course they must have welcomed this because they could also have used it as a propaganda, in those days. You know, someone not wanting to get out, but someone, a star, wanting to go into the Soviet Union. So it is said that the story goes that his wife and him were put up in a brilliant hotel, and they stayed there, and the paperwork was being prepared. And then finally, the paperwork comes, and they are now Soviet citizens. So they get moved from the hotel they were in to another hotel. And when they get to this hotel, the hotel is much worse. The conditions are not as great as the other hotel. And so he asks, but why are we being moved to this hotel? And they say, yeah, but you see, Grandmaster Flohr, you were staying in that hotel because you were a guest, but this time you are a citizen of the Soviet Union, So yeah. Anyway, that is quite a nice story, and a rather sad story when I read it, because I really like his games, and every time I read about him, it makes, I get the feeling that he was a very nice person. Anyway, he was working with Mikhail Botvinnik in one of the World Championship matches, and Botvinnik, they analyzed uh, throughout the night, and but Botvinnik went and analyzed himself again, and then he chose a different path. So Apparently, when they were walking back for Botvinnik, luckily he did manage to win this game, but they were walking back from the playing hall, and Flohr asked him, "But I mean, why did you not choose the lines that we analyzed?" And Botvinnik just bluntly says to him, "No, no, no. But I mean, I went and reanalyzed the whole thing myself." You know, and so it is said that Flohr started. I mean, he couldn't hold his emotions. He burst out crying, because it obviously meant that Botvinnik did not trust him, right? That Botvinnik felt that he was so sort of suspicious of him that even after he had analyzed with him, he was worried that maybe he would get the notes or whatever to the other camp. So Botvinnik changed. So anyway, yeah, but I think they remained friends still with Botvinnik, and yeah, he became a. But after when he was in the Soviet Union, he didn't regain his strength. He somehow his psyche was maybe a little bit attacked during this. He was very worried during the Second World War, obviously because he was fearing for his life, I guess. And yeah, this it impacted very negatively on him, and he was never the same. And many of his games, if you look at his games after that, he was making a lot of quick draws. The will to fight was gone. Hence, he became more of a journalist, afterwards, and so on. But yeah, I mean, a real talent who, as life goes, had things been different historically and this and that, he may have become maybe a world champion. Maybe, who knows? We don't know, but I will show you this game that he played here against Max Euwe. This is the match that he drew against Euwe, and let's have a look. He was playing with White here. So yeah, in this match he won two games, lost two games, and four games were drawn. And of course, Max Euwe later on became world champion. So yeah, he was quite formidable. Salo Flohr plays d4, and this is a Slav. Okay, knight f3, just normal development. Yeah, for beginners, or rather, not maybe I shouldn't say beginners, but if you're starting out as a club player, yeah, this Queen's Gambit, the idea is simple. That if Black does take, then White has got a strong center. White could choose to play directly here, e4 or e3, but generally, this is more than enough compensation for the pawn. And if Black wants to keep the pawn, Black has to play awkward moves like b5 and so on. And this position is going to be riddled with weaknesses. There are instances, I'm not saying now, I'm just saying as an example, where White sacrifices the pawn and plays pawn to b3, even something like that. And after, say, pawn takes pawn, let's say queen takes b3, and just plays like this, because look at the black squares here. Look at this pawn. Later on, White will obviously put a rook on c1, and White will just have simple rook on c1, rook on d1, simple development with a lot of pressure for the pawn. So anyway, yeah, okay, at this level, these guys, they know what they're doing. So he just plays like this variation, and Flohr plays bishop g5. Okay, knight d7. This is still theory. Plays pawn takes pawn, e3, bishop e7, bishop d3. So they've transposed to a queen's gambit variation. And Black plays rook e8. The idea, of course, is to get the pieces into the game, especially the bishop and then the rook. So he wants to play knight to f8, because on f8 the knight defends the pawn on h7, right? And then you are ready then to develop the bishop. Castles, knight f8 and knight e5. This line, used to be very strong. There was a grandmaster, American grandmaster by the name of Pillsbury, and Pillsbury used to play this method with 95, maybe not exactly in the same position, and he would follow up with some f4s, right? He would play f4, he would put his rook on e1, and then he would make that rook lift, rook to f3, and he would start attacking on the king side. So this is more or less the idea. And we see now Oeve fighting against this idea with knight g4. The idea, of course, is that now f4 is not possible, isn't it? Because the pawn on, let's put it on the board, the pawn on e3 is hanging, and this would be a fork. This would be a disaster for white, right? So he exchanges the pieces and plays rook e1. So now black is slowly reaching an equal position, actually, and he plays rook d8, knight e2. The reason why he's playing knight e2 is that he does not want a position or a situation where black can exchange the bishop with bishop h5 and bishop g6. So because black's bishop is considered a slightly worse piece because of the pawn structure here, pawn on d5, pawn on c6, pawn on b7. These pawns are in the same color as the bishop, so they tend to block the bishop. So this is a very, very technical game. So he plays knight e2. Now notice that if bishop h5, then white will play just simply knight f4 and exchange the knight for the bishop, yeah? So, all right, he plays rook d6, knight g3, rook h6. So Oive must get some counterplay on the king side. Bishop f5 is a very good move to swap some pieces, and then he plays the move h3. The queen moves back. B4 is the so-called minority attack. This is when we have this structure. You see what white wants to do. White wants to push this pawn forward to b5, and then white will then take on c6 and create a weakness either on c6 or on d5 if black decides to take on b5. It's called a minority attack because notice that it's two pawns that are then attacking these 4 pawns, so to speak, right? So knight e6 is played, rook b1, knight c7, and a4 supporting the attack. Plays pawn to a6. This is a well-known strategically idea. White would love to put the knight on c5 now in this position because, you know, if we were to imagine the white knight landing on c5, it would put incredible pressure on the queen side. So he maneuvers this knight. First and foremost, he's always thinking about the rook, because doesn't want to allow an attack to happen. So he wants to play knight g4 and then knight e5, maybe knight d3 and knight c5. So he's making these movements are also very prophylactic, right? That he's playing. Now, notice that he's threatening knight g5, attacking the rook and threatening checkmate. So f6 is played. But this move maybe is the main culprit in the position. And now he goes, because you see the pawn on f6 weakens some white squares, but it stops the rook from moving to the king side to further trouble him. Now he focuses his attention on the queen side. Now the knight is coming to c5. Knight lands on c5, and the rook goes to c1. He's now slowly going to try and break through black's queen side. Rook d8, the knight moves back. So slowly, he's making tactical threats. It's very important, even in a quiet position as this, dear viewer, to look at patterns. The queen and the rook are putting pressure on the queen on c8. So white is threatening a simple move like b5. Simple but strong, because if black captures, then white can play rook takes b5, because then you will drop some material on c8, right? So it plays queen b8, understandable. Now he plays knight f4. The opponent plays knight e6 and swaps and continues with his plan. So the material, such a technical position, and is playing so technically strong. So even though the material is getting reduced, but the pressure is constantly there. Constantly there. Notice now that, of course, it's very easy to blunder. Let's say rook c8, I take. I'm just making an illustration here, right? That it would be very easy, for example, to blunder into something like this, as an example. So you have to, I'm not necessarily saying that would be the sequence, but I'm just trying to show the potential threats and the dangers that are there in this uh, position. Yeah. So hence here he plays c takes b5. So rook takes b5. Now we see there are two weaknesses. The pawn on b7 and the pawn on d5 are now weaknesses. b6. So now we put pressure on b3, b6, excuse me. Well, it was very difficult to defend, because how do you defend it? If you move your rook to d8, then I will take on d5. Yeah, so he plays like this, and we reach this end game. And now the problem with the end game is the weakness on d5, but generally the pawn on f6 has also created some weaknesses on black's king side. Plays g6. Because anyway, I'm not saying immediately, but in the future, a move like king f5 is also possible. I move maybe h4, h5, yeah. Imagine I play f3, g4, h4, h5, h6 with my king on f5. So I will be able to break through. And he plays g6, g4, and now after rook to b7 check, it goes back, king g3, and now there's a problem with the pawn on h7. Difficult to defend, because if you play h5, for example, white will simply take and then proceed to attack the pawn with rook h7 and then just capture the pawn. So yeah, this is, such a very, very strong technical game where he actually just outmuscles somebody like Max Euwe, who was a very strong strategist. I mean, Max Euwe wrote many middle game books, and of course beat Alexander Alekhine, became world champion, and so on and so on. So it really shows the qualities that Salo Flohr had. And yeah, for me, I think that, he was certainly one of those players that should be remembered by chess lovers. He contributed a lot. And we need to understand his circumstances, though, why he didn't fulfill his potential as well, right? Yeah, very close to being world champion, and different circumstances, different certain things in history not happening. Who knows what would have happened? But certainly one of my favorite players as well, Salo Flohr, brilliant positional player. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and we're introduced to another fantastic player whose games you should study. So please remember, dear viewer, these players that I am introducing to those who don't know them, study their games. There's a lot that you will pick up by looking at games of these great players. Yeah. So yeah, till next time. Um, we are going to be looking at something else that's very interesting. So for now, I will say, yeah, checkmate.